What if a simple message could completely change the course of your life? James, a man trapped in his pain and loneliness, received an invitation that seemed ordinary, but opened the doors to an unimaginable transformation. Today, you will discover how he found the courage to face his fears, reconnect with his essence, and turn his scars into inspiration. Stay with me until the end, because this story could be the push you need to transform your own life. James was a man of few words, living in a small, quiet town in the United States. Since he lost his wife in a tragic accident 5 years ago, he had isolated himself from the world, finding refuge in his solitary routine. The days dragged on between the silence of his home and the distant sounds of other people's lives in the neighborhood. His porch, with chairs worn by time, was his only point of contact with the outside world. Despite this, there was a secret desire hidden in his heart, to write a book that would transform his pain into inspiration for others. Writing, for James, was a promise never fulfilled. He dreamed of putting on paper the feelings he carried, but always gave up before starting, suffocated by the fear that his words wouldn't be enough. Doubt and loneliness formed a vicious cycle that prevented him from moving forward. Although his story was filled with challenges and lessons, he didn't believe anyone would care to listen. What he didn't know was that sometimes, a simple opportunity can completely transform the trajectory of a life. It all began on a rainy morning when an unexpected notification on his phone changed the course of his story. It was a message from Mark, his childhood best friend, whom he hadn't seen in years. "I'm coming back to town. Shall we meet?" the message said. For a moment, James hesitated. Isolation had become his safe space, and the idea of socializing again made him anxious. But something in that message made him pause and reflect. Maybe it was time to emerge from the cocoon he had built around himself. With doubts and fear, but also with a hidden desire for change, James accepted the invitation. That decision seemed small, but it would be the beginning of a journey that would transform his life forever. Mark's message was not just a reunion with an old friend. It was a call to reclaim parts of himself that James believed he had lost forever. And so, not knowing what awaited him, he took the first step toward hope, connection, and the discovery of a greater purpose. When James finally met Mark at the local cafe, time seemed to have reversed. Although the years had left marks on both of them, the childhood friendship was still there, ready to be rekindled. The conversation started shyly, but soon turned into a dive into memories and stories of overcoming. Mark shared about his own battles, a recent divorce, and the restart of his life. This vulnerability touched James deeply. For the first time, he realized he was not alone in his pain and that everyone in some way faces their own storms. The reignited friendship brought a breath of life to James's monotonous routine. Inspired by the conversation, James decided to revisit his old notebook, the one that had gathered dust over the years. Sitting at the table, he began to write again, hesitant but determined. The words flowed like a surge of contained emotions, revealing the depth of his pain and longing. However, with each page written, he felt he was also unearthing ghosts from the past. Memories of his wife surfaced, bringing a mix of sadness and comfort. Although writing was difficult, James knew he was finally facing something he had avoided for too long. Meanwhile, his friendship with Mark was also facing its own challenges. The mutual support they found in the beginning began to give way to subtle tensions. In one conversation, Mark remarked, "You always seem to be in your own world, James." The phrase, although said without malice, struck James as a deep criticism. He began to question whether he could maintain a true friendship while still grappling with his own pains. This doubt made him withdraw again, almost as a protective reflex against the possibility of new emotional wounds. At the same time, a new opportunity arose for James, an invitation to participate in a literary event in town. It was the perfect chance to share his writing, something he had always dreamed of. However, fear consumed him. He wasn't sure if he was ready to expose his innermost emotions to the world. With Mark facing his own problems and James's mother's health beginning to decline, he felt pressured from all directions. Once again, he was faced with a choice: remain in his comfort zone, or confront the unknown in search of something greater. The invitation to the literary event loomed over James like a mix of opportunity and terror. He knew that participating would be a milestone in his life, but the fear of judgment paralyzed him. To complicate matters further, his mother's health unexpectedly worsened. With each visit to the hospital, he felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. One afternoon, while holding her hand, he heard something that shook him. "James, you can't stop living because of me. Your story needs to be told." That phrase sounded like a plea and an encouragement, reigniting the flame of courage he had been trying to ignore. Still, the decision was not easy. James was torn between love for his mother and the need to move forward with his own dreams. He spent sleepless nights reviewing his written words and questioning whether they were good enough. Doubt mixed with guilt, creating an emotional whirlwind. It was on one of those nights that Mark reached out to him after weeks of distance. "You need to do this, James. For yourself and for everyone who needs to hear your story." The conversation was the push he needed to make a decision. He decided to participate in the event, bringing with him the strength of his mother's words and the support of his friend. On the day of the event, James felt anxiety take over. Every step to the stage felt endless, and the sound of the audience heightened his insecurity. But, looking at the notebook in his hands, he remembered his mother's and Mark's words. With a trembling voice, he began to read excerpts from his writing. He spoke about loss, loneliness, and overcoming. As the words flowed, he felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. The room was in absolute silence, and James realized he was connecting with those people in a way he never imagined possible. When he finished, a long moment of silence gave way to warm applause. James saw tears in the eyes of some and felt that, for the first time, his story truly mattered. People began to approach him, sharing how his words had touched their own lives. That moment was a turning point. He realized that his writing was not just a way to cope with his pain, but also a beacon for those who needed hope. The courage he found on stage became the catalyst for a transformation he never thought possible. After the literary event, James felt as if he had broken an invisible barrier that had held him back for years. The words of gratitude he received from the audience echoed in his mind, filling him with a new feeling: belonging. He realized that his story, once seen as a burden, was now a path to connection. The pain that consumed him had transformed into an instrument of inspiration. Upon returning home, he sat at his desk and looked at the notebook where it all began. This time there was no doubt in his mind. He would continue writing, not just for himself, but for all the people who needed to hear his words. His relationship with his mother also changed profoundly. The visits to the hospital were no longer marked only by worry and sadness, but by deep and meaningful conversations. He included her in his ideas for upcoming writings, and she encouraged him with stories from her own youth. Although her health remained fragile, the connection between them strengthened, bringing light to the difficult days. James began to understand that caring for her was a way to repay all the love and strength she had given him throughout his life, and that finding balance between his dreams and responsibilities was a continuous learning process. Mark also played an essential role in this transformation process. Despite previous conflicts, their friendship became stronger and more honest. Mark, who was facing his own battles, found inspiration in James's courage to reconnect with his own life. The conversations between the two, once laden with tension, now flowed with mutual support and encouragement. James realized that human connections were more than a refuge. They were a mirror that helps us see who we truly are and who we can become. Over time, James published his first book, a collection of writings that narrated his journey of overcoming and the lessons learned along the way. The book was well received, but for him, the greatest success was not seeing his work on the shelves. It was knowing that, through his words, he could touch the hearts of others and perhaps help them find their own strength. Sitting on his porch watching the sunset, James felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that challenges lay ahead, but now he was equipped with something he had never had before: the certainty that, with courage and connection, he could face anything. This story touched you. Don't let your own battles paralyze you. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs inspiration. Your journey can also be a beacon for others.